based on the design from the legendary special effects artist Stan Winston for the unmade American 1994 Godzilla film. Today we're taking a look at a figure you've never seen before, just like that movie. This is the Stan Winston Godzilla by KamenRiderSilver. Before we get into the review, I just want to give a shout out to KamenRiderSilver. You could find their shop on Etsy. I really hope that down the line there is a Shin Godzilla and maybe Showa Mecha Godzilla planned for the future, because those will be instant purchases for me from this shop. Anyway, let's get into this review. Beginning with this sculpt, this is a 3D printed figure, and while it is based on the Stan Winston design, the entire sculpt itself is a completely original creation by KamenRiderSilver. The moment I came across this figure, I was immediately in love with this style. At the time of this recording, this figure is still actually available for purchase on KamenRiderSilver's shop, and it comes in two different scales. You can get it either in a 3-inch scale or a 6-inch scale. I opted for the 6-inch one just because I prefer my figures to be a little bit on the bigger side. I'm not sure if these are printed in different colors, but the version that I got came in this beautiful olive green blank tone, and there was some assembly required with the tail. That's the only piece that you actually have to attach, but it was a very easy process. It just plugs right in, and I used super glue to keep it attached. And as we take a closer look at this sculpt here, I will be jumping from this unpainted version to a hand-painted version I did myself, just to kind of show you the before and after, and the true potential of this stunning sculpt by KamenRiderSilver. So in its blank form, you can see that this has such an impressive level of detail. If you really want to, you can definitely do a side-by-side with the Stan Winston design to kind of get an idea of exactly what KamenRiderSilver was basing it off of, and I've included some images here for reference as well. But I really do approach this from the perspective that this is an original work from KamenRiderSilver because, like I said, while it is based off of the Stan Winston design, it is stylized in a way that I think definitely makes it its own, and really reminds me of a Sofubi toy, which is why I think this style truly appealed to me so much. And while I do like big figures, I do think that this 6-inch scale is perfect. This is one of those figures that I think just looks amazing in hand. It has just the perfect proportions, is very aesthetically pleasing, and as you'll see later in the video, compared with other figures, it just sits at home perfectly with other Godzilla figures too. The overall pose of this figure is excellent. It has this sort of imposing nature, but there is this level of whimsy and cuteness to it in that stylized interpretation. And I really love this tail pose on this figure. It just has this amazing S-curve to it that is so perfect. But now we jump to the painted version of the figure. Like I said, I hand painted this using regular paint brushes and acrylic paints. I was originally going to use an airbrush gun, but for this particular version, I kind of just wanted to get in there with some good old-fashioned paint brushes because there was a lot of blending that I knew I wanted to do. And since I was going for a more accurate paint style to the Stan Winston design, I wanted to really implement this monochromatic paint scheme of mostly greens. So while it may be hard to tell, I'm going to try my best throughout the review to show you the different shades of green that are throughout it. But overall, I'm happy with the result. However, I will say that painting eyes and teeth are not my strong suit, so I think that those are the weakest portions of it. I may go in after this review and touch it up some point in the future. I took my time when painting this figure because my biggest concern was that I would hinder the beautiful existing sculpt with a bad paint job. But I am satisfied with the overall result. Using this monochromatic green paint scheme, I really wanted to implement a variety of highlights and lowlights and shades and just dark colors, lights, and everything in between to just bring out everything in this sculpt that it has to offer. So in this final result, you'll see as we look through the figure that you can still see these elements of the sculpt there. Some of them may be a little bit more subtle or not as apparent, but of course when you're looking at a blank figure, everything is much more in your face because there is no paint on it. As I spin this figure, you'll see how light and shadow bring out all these little details throughout it. There are so many little crevices and scales in the entire figure, which is truly impressive, especially for the scale that it's in. As we take a closer look at this figure, you'll notice that there's such a variety of texture that is present throughout it, which adds such a level of depth to it. It's not just scales throughout the figure, but you also have bumps that you can see in the stomach and chest area, and even wrinkles in the neck. The head sculpt is just as impressive as the rest of the figure. Front-facing, Godzilla does look quite angry with that furrowed brow and that snarl, and I do so love the way that the teeth really jut out and look very sharp. Like I said, my paintwork for the eyes and teeth are definitely the weakest part of this figure, so I don't think I did it full justice, but I do hope that you can see here, to the best of my ability, how good the sculpt does look. From this particular angle, you can really see the array of textures that are on display here with the head sculpt. Of course, at the top of the head, we have those sort of little dorsal bumps, I guess, I don't know what you want to call them, that feed into the actual dorsals themselves, obviously to the back of the figure. But then we have those little ears that look good, and then of course on the cheek, we have these bumps that add a lot of depth to the face. The overall shape of the head looks great, and I do think that the snout protrudes quite prominently and highlights that sort of evil-looking grin, which is my favorite look on any Godzilla. I also want to highlight the profile of this figure. I think this is one of the best-looking silhouettes I've seen on a Godzilla figure that I own, and I don't mean that lightly. I really tried to capture it here as best as I could in this footage, but there's just something so visually pleasing about this sculpt. Godzilla sort of has this very slightly hunched look, and I love the arm pose, and the tail is just perfect in the way that it's positioned and posed, and I love the way that it slightly is raised a little bit, and the dorsals I think look excellent, which we'll take a closer look at in a moment. This sculpt certainly exudes an air of power and majesty. I think it perfectly captures that awe-inspiring feeling that Godzilla projects. So at this angle, we have a great look at the dorsals, as well as the texture that's present on the backside of the figure. First, we'll look at the dorsal plates. I think these are sculpted wonderfully, just like the rest of the figure. They certainly have their own unique look to them, and as you can see, as we look closer at it, there is texture that is present on the dorsals themselves, and that's the recurring theme I think with this figure overall, is that there is texture all over this thing, which really adds such a level of depth and high quality to it. So we have 3 rows of dorsals, and then we have these 2 sort of outer layers, I guess, on both sides that are much smaller and just feed into the texture of the body of the figure. But the main dorsals here that we're looking at, of course, start from the back of the head of Godzilla and work their way down into the tail of the figure. I do like the way that the dorsals on the body itself look different from the dorsals that are on the tail. They sort of transition from these big looking dorsal plates into these smaller ones that retain a different shape. Which of course brings us to this tail, which I've mentioned multiple times at this point in the review already because I love the pose of it. I love the decision to keep this tail sort of elevated and not just flat on the ground. It adds a great level of movement to the figure and just presents this overall impressive image, like I said, in the silhouette of it. And at low angles like this, it really does give a swooping effect, which is really cool. In terms of articulation, this figure does not have any, but it certainly makes up for its lack of articulation with the overall amazing sculpt. Usually with the figures I collect, they don't come with accessories, but this figure actually came with a bonus destroyed building accessory, which looks amazing. Just like the sculpt of the Godzilla figure we're looking at, the sculpt on this building is nothing short of excellent. It sort of has this collapsed appearance to it with a lot of damage in one particular corner. Now, this building is unpainted, and I have not gotten around to painting it just yet, but I certainly will at some point in the near future. But in terms of the way the building looks itself, I think it pairs very nicely with this Godzilla and honestly can go alongside many other kaiju figures as well. When I got this figure, I didn't even know that it came with any sort of accessory, so I was certainly pleasantly surprised when I got it, and that's just another plus to the overall purchase itself. Now, like I mentioned, this figure is in a 6-inch scale, and when taking a measuring tape to it, it actually does measure just about 6 inches tall. And this is what it looks like alongside some of my other kaiju figures. So this is the Stan Winston Godzilla by KamenRiderSilver. The moment I saw this figure on Instagram, I instantly went to KamenRiderSilver's Etsy shop and purchased this thing because I was blown away by how impressive this sculpt looks. As I've continued to say throughout the review, the level of detail in this thing is truly amazing, and I think that KamenRiderSilver truly has a wonderful talent at sculpting in such a unique style as well. It definitely speaks to me as a collector, especially when it comes to stylized figures. Now, of course, with this particular Godzilla design, since it's technically an unmade version of Godzilla, we don't really have any official merchandise for this sculpt, so it is interesting to see someone make it on their own. There was such high quality and effort put into this figure that it looks like it's an official figure alongside my other kaiju figures that I have as well. I'm not affiliated or sponsored by KamenRiderSilver's Etsy shop, but just as a customer who randomly decided to buy this figure, I cannot recommend their shop enough. Seriously, you should go check out their shop on Etsy. Link is in the description as well. You can follow them on Instagram. I know that at this time there were other Godzilla figures that have become available on their shop, so that's definitely pretty cool. Like I said, if you're watching this KamenRiderSilver, please make a Shin Godzilla and or Showa Mechagodzilla at some point, because I will absolutely purchase those as well. But even for the ones that I may not be purchasing, I will say that overall, I absolutely love KamenRiderSilver's style. It's very unique. It kind of has this chibi vibe, this sofubi vibe, but it's very much its own thing. So I think just from an aesthetic point of view, I absolutely love what KamenRiderSilver is doing with their versions of kaiju. Anyway, that's going to be it for the review. I hope you enjoyed it. I had a lot of fun making it. Make sure to check out KamenRiderSilver's Etsy shop. Link is in the description. If you're new to the channel and you like the content, please consider subscribing and taking a look at my other Godzilla content on the channel as well. And lastly, thank you very much for watching, and have a good one.